Hi, I'm Monique Tschofen, and I'm here with Jolene Armstrong to talk about our interactive documentary, Solastalgia. In our online presentation, we'll discuss our recent years-long collaborative thinking about the climate emergency in relation to twin problems of water and fire. First, we'll contextualize our intention as it emerged from our work with the feminist research creation collective, the Decameron Collective. We'll then demonstrate how we've been using Scalar to create an interactive documentary/research creation project that employs a range of analog and digital documentary practices, including sound recording, infrared photography, watercolors, video, poetry, anchoring our approaches in theories of embodiment, that is the role of the felt sense and the body, as well as in eco-theory notions of solastalgia, that is the distress caused by environmental change. We've been thinking about Bethany Nowosky's 2014 keynote, Digital Humanities in the Anthropocene, in which she blatantly raised what the real issues facing us all are. To make plain the premise upon which this talk rests, she says, I take as given the scientific evidence that human beings have irrevocably altered conditions for life on our planet. I acknowledge, too, that our past actions have a forward motion, that we owe what ecologists like David Tillman call an extinction debt, and that this debt will be paid. She was speaking over a decade ago, and here we are, paying the debts. It's early May, and communities near Jolene and Alberta are currently evacuating due to forest fires that are early this year. Every year they're earlier. And we all watched the LA and Jasper fires last year. And we're watching the US wipe out decades worth of environmental legislation, pledging to log and mine in national parks and bring back coal. Solastalgia reflects our ambition to gather our lived experience, document our observances, and share our creations in response to the unfolding climate emergency. Partly informed by climate science data and global events, but partly informed by personal and anecdotal observation, our work grapples with and responds to and expresses how it feels to be living in this moment. In order to grasp the scale of the crisis, our project is not only a multimedia response to the crisis, but it's an example of how research creation practitioners can use a variety of tools to document and share their observances and responses, and gather a range of media in one platform. We believe that thoughtful response to global crisis are equally formed by acknowledging and harnessing despair to raise awareness, combat dis and misinformation, and invite collaborative reflection and action. We're both English professors with PhDs in comparative literature who made our way into digital and interactive storytelling much later in our careers. After co-leading with Angela Yosa and our developer Hendrik de Haan and 6 other members of the Decameron Collective, the construction of 2 large digital worlds about crisis, one about pandemics past and present called Decameron 2.0, and one about truncated mourning in the context of personal loss, war, and the climate emergency, we presented last year at IFM called Memory Eternal, as well as several smaller digital projects that connected to our work in translation and feminism. We decided to turn our attention to the polycrisis, undertaking work that ultimately underlines our impotence. The first thing we realized was that we need new forms to think through the climate emergency. We found that the intellectual tools at our disposal in our disciplines have been improperly segregated. Philosophical, critical, and scientific disciplines aren't connected to painting, filmmaking, writing poetry, or documentary. And obviously, these different modes have different ambitions and different moods, engage different capacities and audiences, but we really think they're less discrete categories than understood to be. What we were seeking models for didn't exactly exist. What we wanted would be nonlinear and rhizomatic, polyvocal and multidisciplinary, protecting states of not knowing. It would be effective and embodied, and situated in the specificity of places. It would be integrated, linking different ways of knowing, the poetic, the personal, and science and data-driven research. And not only would it be documentary, but it would be artistic, What we wanted was to create a text without barriers and without boundaries between insides and outsides. Scalar, the free open source app from the Alliance for Networking Visual Culture, provided us with such a capacity. In Scalar, it's possible to integrate data, including maps and news stories, but also integrate rich media like sound, still images, and video, and also include robust metadata. So we very deliberately started our project imposing on ourselves no constraints, boundaries, or rules in a true spirit of experimentation. We joined authors like Kim Stanley Robinson, who argued in the foreword to an ecotopian lexicon that we need new vocabularies that do more to cast light on the long emergency of the 21st century, when anthropogenic climate change will impact the biosphere and all its inhabitants. Jolene came upon a term that deeply resonated for both of us: Solastalgia, a word coined by Glenn Albrecht and others to describe the distress caused by climate change. Based on the Latin words for solace, solari, desolation, desolare, and pain or sorry, algia, solastalgia, Albrecht wrote, rolled out of my mouth and off my tongue as if it had always been there. He says, I define solastalgia as the pain or distress caused by the ongoing loss of solace and the sense of desolation connected to the present state of one's home and territory. It is existential and lived experience of negative environmental change manifested as an attack on one's sense of place. And so this term, solastalgia, opened up a creative space for us, not just to think about climate change, but also track the feelings, the emotional relationship we have with the natural and urban environments we occupy. We took up the term solastalgia as a guiding concept because we connected with the way the coined term captured more than simply scientific observation of climate. We liked how it describes a state of sorrow or distress that we were experiencing, an anticipatory grieving brought on by watching, feeling, and breathing in a world in climate crisis. So our solastalgia makes room for what Matthew Fuller and Olga Gurinova describe as conditions such as anguish and devastation, which relate to the ecological but are also constitutive of politics and the ethical. But in making a work that captures feelings of grieving and frustration, we found we became more madly in love with the world and all its beings than ever before. So to love and be angry, to love and be disappointed, to love and be puzzled, curious, engaged, committed, but paralyzed, we realized we were trying to zero in on the intersection of these antithetical and paradoxical states. In what feels like a never-ending cascade of social, political, and environmental upheavals, it's often difficult to summon resilience and easier in some ways to give in to despair. This project honors the emotional impact of grief and of bearing witness to an unfolding disaster and the various real emotional responses to devastation that we experience. We offer this as an act of penthos, a public display of grief and mourning, and argue that by expressing and acknowledging these feelings, even centering them, we can move through them towards meaningful action and resilience. John Charles Ryan writes that on a planet undergoing rapid environmental change, three features, embodiment, relationality, and multiscalarity, are important to a hydropoetics attuned to the urgencies of the present. And we've centered these three features in solastalgia as well, drawing in one space all of the embodied senses in ways that build dense networks of relationships with each other and with our places. And we talk about the world in crisis at microscopic all the way through to planetary scales. We'll talk about aesthetics, this psychological state of estrangement that is the new abnormal of the Anthropocene, characterized by grieving over the changing climate, erratic weather, fire, and species extinction, reminded us that European art has typically worked to generate aesthetic experiences that depict the world in ways that are pleasing. And this in turn has colluded in rendering the reality of climate change somehow imperceptible. Anne Birmingham writes about how the British rustic and picturesque traditions emerged from the enclosure movement. Landscape painters constructed vistas that were essentially hiding what were new and vast networks of fences. while Nicholas Mirzoff shows how the spectacular colors in Monet's paintings log but don't register the volume of coal particles that were reflecting the light yellow. Already in 2002, W.J.T. Mitchell had shown how the representation of landscapes and their aesthetics are deeply involved in ideology. He describes landscapes as a cultural medium that has a double role with respect to something like ideology. It naturalizes a cultural and social construction, representing artificial worlds as though they were simply given and inevitable, and also makes that representation operational by interpolating its beholder in some more or less determinate relation to its giveness as a sight and sight. And so to generate experiences that assert a landscape's giveness, that are polished or soothing, or conform to the expectations of genre, it seemed to us, would work against our purpose. What we've always been more interested in is violating genres and violating expectations. As researchers and creators, we sought to broaden our reliance on language to include nonverbal perception and ways of knowing that don't get stuck in systems of ideology and language. This desire to move beyond inspired us as readers, writers, thinkers, and artists to take up and appropriate new tools. So through the process of working through Solastalgia, we're combining art, philosophy, and citizen science. We repurpose various types of recording equipment, including sound and image, with the curiosity of wondering how else might we observe, understand, and record the things that are there, but we might not actually perceive. What's happening just beyond the naked eye or just beyond the hearing of our poor human ears? And how do these alternative samplings and visualizations help us connect more deeply with our environment?
Our Solastalgia documents many images and experiences that might be considered beautiful. They're all either made using technologies that were never intended to be used for art, or they're framed differently, connected to the unseen, unrecognized, ephemeral, hiding in plain sight, and taken for granted. Some examples from the work include a sunset viewed from inside a moving vehicle, a disorienting video of blue toothpaste marring a pristine beach, infrared photography showing the outline of an anthill, the sound of snow or a stone. Our purpose with these documentations that at once show the world as it is and defamiliarize experience results in what Tim Ingold describes is to recover the sense of what it means to inhabit the world. Erica Monde, in her teachings on embodied documentary, talks about filming the subject in a purely sensorial way, communicating a specific sensory experience. Accordingly, in this interactive piece, we sought to break the barriers of text and visual media by including audio recordings. For this, we experimented with recording things that we don't usually think of as possessing sound, or being capable of producing sound. It was an exercise of attunement to our surroundings, of letting go of preconceived notions of what is observable around us. By using contact mics, we have recorded things such as dirt, bark, anthills, and rocks. The inclusion of these kinds of synesthetic elements that challenge the reader are phenomenological. They ask us to rethink what we are able to perceive and what we think we know about the world around us. They even ask us to reconsider how we understand our sensory abilities, how we recognize through touch, sound, or vision, or other sensations, and how we use those to identify and know the world around us. As practitioners in building the Solastalgia Scalar interactive site, we asked ourselves, how can we involve as many senses as possible? How can we use various technologies and methods of recording and documenting the way in which our bodies interact with the world, respond to events such as climate and various elements in our environment such as rocks, plants, air, temperature, and water, for example? These kinds of exercises and experiments in sensation and embodiment decenter typical ways in which we assume knowledge. They ask us to step outside of dominant hegemonic Western discourses and into unfamiliar, perhaps even nonverbal terrain. Modes of interactivity we have used include hyperlinks, images, video, 3D Gaussian scans, and data visualization tools that Scalar supports, such as timelines, maps, word clouds, and relationships with connections and paths. These various modalities invite the reader to explore the content in novel ways, to arrange the things we have assembled in ways that might create new and surprising understandings. Since the subject matter of this project is complex, multidimensional, and nonlinear, interactive elements enable us to preserve various complexities by offering multiple pathways and ways of reading that are also nonlinear and encourage multidimensional thinking. Instead of pages of text, we offer a landscape through which readers can devise their own routes. It's always useful to look at one's work and ask, what is it, and what is it like? Solastalgia is polyvocal in that there are two authors, but also the various pages draw in from other voices, taking up imaginary dialogues with other writers, scientists, thinkers, mythic figures, and artists. Looking for models and metaphors to describe the work, we rediscovered Benjamin's Arcades project, which, like our project, was a nonlinear assemblage of detritus. We considered the vernacular family photographic album and, of course, field notes, but we were also able to consider other models of assemblage like the rock collection or shell collection. Thinking about stones lets us tap into the colonial histories of the geological, but also think about what an epistemological model that recuperates childlike wonder through the senses might be like. Our point was that at this moment in history, there are a plurality of ways of drawing together diverse forms of knowledge. We found ourselves especially drawn to the epistolary tradition. Much of Solastalgia logs a back and forth between Jolene and Monique, writing at distinct moments in time and from different places. 𝗔𝗯𝘀𝘁𝗁𝘁 has described epistolary discourse as a mapping, which leaves it ideal for the kind of situated and emplaced ways of knowing we wanted to cultivate. As Altman says, the I of epistolary discourse always situates himself vis-a-vis another. His locus, his address, is always relative to that of his addressee. To write a letter is to map one's coordinates, temporal, spatial, emotional, intellectual, in order to tell someone else where one is located at a particular time and how far one has traveled since the last writing. The epistolary tradition is integral to the birth of the novel and the birth of the Enlightenment, and is very much associated with women's voices from Vida Sackville-West to Françoise de Graffigny. It seemed important to have this form of textualized dialogue at the birth of our new, as yet unnamed, interactive documentary practice. deeply collaborative work built over time that avows the situatedness of perspectives, challenges the model of humanities scholars working alone, as well as declarative modes of God's eye documentary. While we did not set ourselves any thematic constraints, we found that things coalesced into two dominant threads or themes: fire and water. One thing we've thought about a lot while Jolene has been living through the immediate violent destruction brought on by wildfires is how the Canadian and American West has experienced climate change differently than the Great Lakes regions and Maritimes. Easterners don't yet appreciate that for those in BC and Alberta, summer has become known as fire season. This asymmetry leaves a good part of the country under the impression that we still have lots of time. We don't. Fires happen when there isn't enough water. At the same time as the droughts have been ongoing in some areas for a decade or more, but the drier the land, the more likely it is to flood, so that any rain that arrives is more likely to cause erosion and damage than it is to rectify water shortage issues. We see fire season and the catastrophic flooding experienced in Europe, the eastern seaboard, and South Asia as being twinned problems, the flip side of one another. Both are life-giving and sustaining, but carry lethal potential. And located as we are in different parts of the country, fire and water have impacted our sense of place and safety in the world. As we are tracking the way these global events feel in the body, how they impact the way we think, how we plan, how we dream, and what we imagine the future might be like, we're asking about how to tune people back into the realities their communities are or soon will be facing, searching to generate experiences that do not lead to numbness or turn people away from emergency. We reach for every genre in every medium we can: photography, infrared photography, film, sound recording, watercolor painting, poetry, scholarly and theoretical prose, personal reflection and citation, maps, CO2 monitors. We are not leading with polemics, and we are not seeking specific answers. This work honors the realization that we cannot know. We grapple with the feelings of not knowing and embrace the epistemology of not knowing. This state is complex, and we have been trained to resist not knowing, but there is also peace to be found in not knowing, to be able to say, here is something beautiful that we do not understand. Maybe our place is not to know everything. Maybe it is to be humbled. As explained by Monde, embodied documentary filmmaking utilizes processes drawn from practices such as, but not limited to, focusing and body hermeneutics, to access an awareness of the internal state, which then informs the filmmaking practice as an act of ongoing, embodied dialogue between self, subject, and the larger socio-political structures of the body's place in the world, the body politic. We have used these embodied documentary techniques to build on these themes, to record our personal experiences and reflections, while also connecting our work to the relationship of others in scholarship, news media, and art. We are not scientists, and we are not political leaders with the power to influence the world. What we have done in many instances is take up the tools of science to enhance our abilities to observe, not to do the work of science, but to say, look at this, beautiful, mad, outrageous, dangerous, wondrous, life-giving world. We use these alternative lenses to look at the world anew, not to draw scientific conclusions, but rather because it is beautiful and worth examining more closely. Our project experiments with the online platform of Scalar as a possible way in which to inspire opportunities for shared collective expression and experience. Our intention is to treat our site as a living, continually evolving, interactive experience where others can find commonality and usefulness in the interactivity and be inspired to collect and build their own sites of observation and experience. It is an invitation to express feelings and worries, and to validate one's own observations and personal experiences with global crises. more than it is an attempt to solve the problems, although we believe that the solutions to the problems can originate in those who are closely attuned to and actively observing and documenting crises in their own environments. In the absence of a collective global will to address social, political, and environmental crises, individuals can work collectively to build their own solutions through shared experiences. In a divided, isolated society, yet one that is hyper-connected, collective action is essential. How can collective activities and a sense of belonging deepen our shared experiences? What media practices can cultivate affective collectivity that challenges the status quo and fosters alternative futures? In the ongoing quest to address rapidly accelerating climate change, how can art and literature support science in its efforts to inspire people to take up the necessary means and will to reduce the impact that human activity has had on the planet? How can art sustain life? Like Alicia Farrell, we assume that arts-based work is an integral component of learning to think disobediently. And this type of creative work invites speculative ways of relating, which may help us to cultivate a more compassionate sociality as we come to understand our disavowal in the field as a debilitating illusion. Solidarity is arrived at through strong organization. It also requires an acknowledgement of shared experience, shared values, and a common desire for change. Our project functions as a kind of SOS call, a site of exploration and documentation and imagination for people to gather within, recognize their own grieving and experience of solastalgia, and enter into the solidarity of a shared expressive dialogue.